This sounds similar also to the idea of biomimicry. We've got Janine Benes's book on our list. But even going back as far as Jan Smuts and his theory of holism, which is from my part of the world.
Yes.
So these ideas have been around a long time. I suppose
That's right.
The question is, have we really seen the shift? I mean, you look at the 80s, there was, some people say the 80s and 90s were all just about greed and money and so on.
Yes.
And then we look at other developments like, let's say, take biotech. Is biotech moving in the direction of living systems, or isn't it?
Well, first of all, you're completely right that these ideas of holism, as it was called first, have been around for a long time. I'm sorry to tell you that I recently discovered that Jan Smuts was not the first. I think Leonardo da Vinci was the first in the 15th century. Leonardo had developed a science which is absolutely holistic, systemic, ecological, and he talked about things like, for instance, he didn't use the word metabolism, but the metabolism of a city. He said, in a healthy city, there's an unimpeded flow of people, of objects, of material goods, and of waste. And he designed cities at several levels where you had several kinds of these flows. So he was the first to use the term healthy city. Now we have a whole international healthy cities movement. And so, you're absolutely right. These ideas have been around for a long time. What has happened recently, I think in the last 25, 30 years, it is that science has developed the language and the tools to really build theories that reflect this, or that embody this holistic philosophy. And the problem has been that a holistic worldview is a non-linear worldview. When you see how everything is interconnected, when you look at networks, when you look at cycles like feedback loops and things like that, these are all non-linear patterns. And if you want to build a science with a mathematical framework, as we often do in our sciences, until recently the mathematics was just not there. Stop this, maybe I will just unlock this. Okay.
That's fine, just we can splice that.
Yeah. Are you rolling?
Yeah.
So until recently, the mathematical tools were just not there, and what has happened in the last 25 years with the help of computers was that mathematicians and scientists have developed complexity theory, known technically as nonlinear dynamics, where they could actually map this nonlinear interconnectedness and set up equations and solve them. This is a very difficult field, but for the first time we have been able to now describe and model nonlinear phenomena in nature. And so there's a whole new language, the language of chaos theory, of complexity theory, with concepts like attractors and bifurcation diagrams and fractals, fractal geometry and things like that. These concepts did not exist 30 years ago. So now when we study nonlinear systems, we know which questions to ask. We know how to go about it. It's still an extremely difficult field, but we know how to approach it. So that, I think, was the main change in the 1930s and 40s. There was a very strong movement in Europe toward systemic thinking. Those were the days when Ludwig von Bertalanffy developed his general systems theory, he had this grand vision of a mathematical theory that would give a unifying description of all systems, living and non-living. Well, he didn't have the mathematics. It was just not available to him. You had cybernetics. The cyberneticists were mathematicians, very brilliant mathematicians like John von Neumann, for example, far superior in their mathematics to Bertalanffy. But still, they made progress, but it was not enough to really describe, say, neural networks, which they were studying. They coined the term self-organization. They talked about patterns, and just to give you one example, they would construct networks of electrical circuits where they had little lamps that were lighting up, and they would send currents through these networks with various switching rules so that a lamp would light depending on the other lamps, on the environment. So they discovered some very complex patterns of cycles, of fluctuations, of stability and instability, all with, wire and pliers and little electric lamps. Well, today we do this with computers, and these are called cellular automata. And they are computer programs that can be much more sophisticated, of course, and can be studied much faster and put together much faster. So there has been huge progress. And when I wrote The Turning Point, this complexity theory was just being developed, and I didn't know about it yet. I mean, I sort of had heard rumors, but I hadn't studied it. Mm-hmm. And so a chapter in The Turning Point, which is called The Systems View of Life, where I describe the alternative to the mechanistic view, is sort of a hodgepodge of developments that happened at the time, which I tried to integrate. But there's no coherent conceptual framework underlying it. And around that time, in 1982, when I published The Turning Point, I met Francisco Varela, who became a friend of colleague and influenced my thinking very much. He was a neurobiologist, and with Umberto Maturana he developed the theory of autopoiesis, of living self-generating networks. And when I met him, I realized that there was now a new level of sophistication that was emerging in the description of living systems. And it took me about 20 years to explore this. And in 2002, I published a book called The Hidden Connections, which, by the way, has the subtitle A Science for Sustainable Living. So sustainability is in the subtitle now. And in this book, I present a synthesis of recent developments in the life sciences, a synthesis that integrates three dimensions of life: the biological, the cognitive, and the social. So the first three chapters of the book are about the nature of biological life, the nature of mind and consciousness, and the nature of social reality. And then I apply this framework to some critical problems of our time, including the management of human organizations, business and management, the problems of biotechnology, genetic engineering, and so on, and the economics, the networks of the global economy, the pros and cons, and then the rise of civil society, sustainability, ecological literacy, eco-design, and so on. So in a sense, this is the 21st century version of The Turning Point, now based on a much more sophisticated and coherent conceptual framework.